Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to news for the week of June 2nd, 2025. So right out the gate, I've got some personal news. One of our contributors for Excalibur has done a lot of work and got Excalibur building on Vite, which
Sweet.
I'm really excited about. It's going to improve our quality of life 10,000%.
I know we talked about it in the last episode, but is it finalized now?
Hasn't been merged yet, but I'll try to merge it this week.
Nice. Well, that would be pretty sweet. And that will be on a full Vite stack, right? Because we're using Vitest and Vite. That's sweet.
Yeah, I think the only thing that isn't right now is our browser stack tests. We still rely on the old Karma version of it, but there's literally only two tests that do like an end-to-end in like multiple different old browsers, so it's not the worst thing in the world.
Very good. Well, it's June, and that means, for us, summer is here. Kids are out of school. Cassie will be done with her work for the summer because she works at a school. And my course that I've been working on is wrapping up this week. So I got my apps in the app stores. I finished all the edits and feedback stuff. So that the distributing.NET MAUI apps course will drop this week. And guess what my next course is going to be about?
Ooh, do tell.
I mentioned it a long time ago because it's been that long, but it's going to be Quick City. So it's going to be all TypeScript all the way down. So I think that will be fun. So that's basically what I'm just going to be working on during the summer. So I think I'm just going to do one course. And so I should not be working too much this summer. It'll be a lot of fun.
Fingers crossed for you.
Woohoo!
Hopefully not working too much. Famous last words.
Yep, exactly. TypeScript FM is sponsored by Excalibur.js, the friendly TypeScript game engine for the web. Like many of you, I got into computers because I loved video games and dreamed of making one, but game development always felt a bit intimidating. Instead, I built a career in web development, though that dream of making games never really went away. Then I met Eric, who showed me I could use my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to create games with just a bit of game design knowledge and the right engine. Excalibur.js makes game development approachable, offering everything you need to build 2D web games. Arcade physics, sprites, animations, input support, and integrations with tools like Tiled and Sprite. It's beginner-friendly, yet flexible enough to grow with you. Our team has published 10 games using Excalibur, all written in TypeScript. If you're a web developer looking to dip your toes into game dev or sharpen your TypeScript skills, give Excalibur.js a try at excalibur.js.com. Click the big tutorial button to start building your first game, Excalibur, a Flappy Bird clone. After that, join our friendly Discord community of web developers who love to help each other and share game dev tips.
So first up for news this week, TypeScript TSC Init finally updates its defaults. It's been kind of the same default for a very, very long time, and you might have been sick of changing all of your tsconfig defaults when you do tsc-init. Well, no longer in TS 5.9 when that drops. It'll be ESM, it'll be no downleveling, which it used to be ES 2016, and it'll be verbatim module syntax is true, which is all of the things that you want. It's all the things that you want. You want all of these things.
What about strict true?
I think that's already been a default. I think strict true has been a default for a while. But if it's not, it should be.
Can I admit something? I actually did not realize there was a -- init flag.
What? I use it all the time. It's like I do npx tsc init all the time.
Okay. I guess I just copy and paste tsconfigs from all over the place. Maybe that's my problem.
Bad Comrade. Bad Comrade.
Nice.
And other TypeScript news, import defer, which is a ECMAScript stage 3 proposal, that syntax landed in the upcoming TypeScript 5.9. So if you're not familiar with import defer, it's kind of a neat little feature to lazy load imports until the feature is used. So normally when you do like an import, that's like a synchronous situation where it'll go and evaluate all of your imports synchronously, and that still happens. But import defer, what that'll do is as soon as you decide to like access a thing on an import, that's the time it'll go and do that import.
Oh, okay. So, because I was going to ask, what is the difference between this and a dynamic import? Because I've definitely used dynamic imports before.
It's similar but different.
Mm-hmm.
So a dynamic import, as far as I'm aware, is completely asynchronous. So like you do it like an await import, that's asynchronous.
Yes.
This, I think, is completely synchronous still. So like you do like, import defer star as some module, you'll go ahead and do your thing. It'll go ahead and do the synchronous import when you decide to go like, hey, my module dot thing. And I could be wrong about that. So if I am wrong, then let me know.
That's cool. Yeah, because I was wondering to do that. I wonder, it must not be static analysis then, because obviously this is going to be supported like natively in the browsers or runtimes. So it must be an execution like at runtime. It just knows you're trying to access this module and now I'm going to load it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. That'll be sweet to learn a little bit more about once it advances farther, but that's sweet, sweet, sweet.
Yeah, and they have an example in that Q&A section of the TC39 proposal of exactly what we're talking about.
Cool. Very good. Speaking of the Vite stack, Vitest 3.2 was just released. It's got some neat APIs. One brand new one is called the Annotation API. It says that it allows you to annotate any test with a custom message and attachment. These annotations are visible in the UI, HTML, JUnit, TAP, and GitHub Actions reporters. So that's pretty sweet. So you can add just random annotations to your tests. And then if you've done locators before, so like you do like find element by ID and that type of thing, you can now extend the built-in locators to find elements more easily. And you would just pass a playwright locator string to create your custom ones. And the other thing is that they spent some time making sure that all these new APIs are fully typed. So your custom locator can be fully type safe. And similarly, they've got custom matchers that you can create using the matchers type. So this allows you to create strongly typed custom matchers, and they'll be typed properly across all of Vitest's APIs. So when you do like expect blah, 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 and then you do dot, and then whatever your custom matcher is, that'll be typed properly in all the different places. And then finally, a really nice use case for explicit resource management. If you use v.spyon or v.fn and your environment supports explicit resource management, you can just tack on a using right before that, and it will auto restore mocked functions. So you no longer have to create like a after test hook to clean up mock functions, which is that's a really nice use case for it.
Definitely. I hadn't considered that, but that's super nice to unwind the mock. Next, we have Vite 7's beta just dropped. And among two of the notable things is it's ESM only. So they're not shipping a common build anymore, or common API from Node. But that's okay, because there's still a way inside of Node to do require ESM. So you could still use it from common code. You just need to use the specific require ESM in Node 20.19 plus. So you need to be in that modus in order to use it. The other thing is they're now changing default browser support to baseline widely available, which is some kind of moniker that they determine is baseline widely available. And I think there was a whole discussion about that online, and I'll add a link to that about what baseline widely available means. And you didn't see it, but I was doing scare quotes the whole time. And on that same vein, Babel 8 beta just dropped, and they're doing something similar as well. They're going to be shipping an ESM only build, but that's okay, again, because you can do require ESM, and same rules apply. There's a ton of bug fixes in that code. There's a whole bunch of things that are version gated, and so there's like a ton that they're adding into that. So definitely check out Babel 8, the beta, but sounds pretty cool.
I like that now that Node proper supports ESM requiring now, all these big libraries and frameworks are moving towards ESM only.
Yeah, I think big part of the adoption curve has been the interoperability between the two not being the greatest when ESM dropped. And that really, I think, hampered adoption. Being able to support both was very difficult and remains to be difficult for years. So people had to do gymnastics in order to make it work. So now that these runtimes are supporting it and that there's like a lot of like common tooling to support it, it's really accelerated ESM adoption.
Nice. I like this overall like simplification of stuff. Like we're sort of coming towards like, hey, everything is in ESM. We're consolidating a lot of these bundlers to be smarter and simpler because just the underlying engines and runtimes are getting smarter and smarter. Okay, next up we have Storybook 9. We covered the beta a little bit when it was out, but now the final release is out this last week. So just as a reminder, they've got new interaction tests, which if you are familiar with Playwright and Cypress, it is essentially that. It's end-to-end testing of your components, and it's actually powered by Vitest and Playwright. So these are tested in real browsers, which is really cool. And then you've got accessibility tests. There's been a lot of quality of life improvements. You can like hover over a violation and it highlights it in your component of like what part of your component is violating the ACTS guidelines, which I forget what ACTS stands for, but it's like accessibility. It's the accessibility guidelines, like automated test suite type deal. And then they've also revamped their Next.js Storybook support, which is now powered by Vite. So again, we've got this consolidation of tooling towards Vite, which is pretty cool. So definitely go check that out if you are using Storybook.
Nice. And next up, I have a bunch of TC39 proposals that advanced. I think a couple of them that I'm very excited about. One of them we talked about already, which is explicit resource management. That's that using statement syntax that we've been talking about. It basically desugars to that try, catch, finally pattern, except you don't have to do weird scoping to make it work with try, catch, finally. You can just throw using on something, which is, I think, C# might have pioneered that feature. I could be wrong about that. But it's a super useful syntax feature where you can just decorate a using on it, and then when it goes out of scope, it'll be cleaned up using the dispose symbol.
Yes.
So that's pretty neat. And then 3 others that I'm very excited about is math.clamp, which, did you know that clamp wasn't part of it in the math package? So like I've rewritten the clamp function for games like a bajillion times. So that's going to be great. We're going to reduce bundle size across the internet by removing everyone's math.clamp implementation. The other one, which I have been sad about for so long, is there's now a proposal for a seeded random number generator in JavaScript. This, believe it or not, hasn't been around. Like you have math.random or crypto.random values, all of which are automatically seeded. You cannot provide a seed, so you cannot get deterministic behavior out of a random unless you implement your own random, which we had to do because it is important to have deterministic behavior when you're testing things, or you need to mock it and then feed it, discrete values, which is just more work. But now there is an API for a proposed API for a seeded random number generator, which is very exciting. And you can inspect the seed, you can set the seed. It's very nice. You go check that out. It's pretty cool. In addition, the third one that I'm very excited about is a bunch of random function helpers. So there's a whole list of them, but like a lot of times you need to be like, I want an integer between -10 and 10. I want a floating point number between this and this. And you don't have to know how to do the correct sampling method to generate like an actual random number between 2 numbers. They added a shuffle function. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff that you wind up doing if you're doing like random stuff that they just are going to implement for you. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, that's lovely. It looks like they have a random.boolean utility, so that will just give you heads or tails, and you can pass a percentage chance of true as an argument, which is neat.
Yeah, it's super cool.
This is going to make game devs that work on the web super happy because we've had to do this all ourselves since the beginning of time.
Yeah. It's a PETA. It's not fun to have to re-implement a random in order to get like random numbers in your game with consistency. The last thing I have on the news is the IRS open sourced the direct file system, which is pretty interesting, it used to be, or it is the web interface for filing your taxes in the United States, which is pretty cool because it's JavaScript and TypeScript. It's pretty cool.
Do you know what's like, so the front end is TypeScript, what's the stack? Do you know?
Well, I actually didn't look, but let's look at their Docker Compose file and see what it is. So they got Postgres. That's cool. Postgres 15. The direct file API is doing something with a Docker file local. I'm not sure what it is.
Well, this is cool. I mean, having the Docker Compose file means that you can just clone this repo and do Docker Compose up or whatever the command is, and bam, you've got your direct file system running on your local machine.
Yeah, you want to file some taxes? Let's you want to spin up your own government that models the United States tax system? Go for it. I mean, that sounds like a terrible idea.
I'm sure that to actually do anything, you'd have to hook it up to their APIs or secrets or that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
This is pretty fun.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I actually am now like morbidly curious about what their API is. It looks like their backend API is Java, which maybe I could have guessed. And okay, the DF client is using, drumroll, it's React.
Okay. Yeah, that's nice. So, but it's not Next.js. It's just like vanilla React app.
Yeah, it's just got Vite, React DOM, React Router, React Redux.
Yep. Okay. Cool. That is very similar to my app, which is basically the same stack, except not Java. Not Java on the back end. It's .NET. But fun. You know what else is fun? The community. We've got some community highlights. So someone posted on Reddit. They wrote an article called The M.I.N.T. Principle, and it's about when to use object-oriented programming in TypeScript. And this was pretty interesting. But the M.I.N.T. principle, M.I.N.T. stands for multi-instance, non-serializable, tightly coupled. And basically, these are kind of the guidelines for what this author believes for when you should use object-oriented programming and when you should not. So, and this made sense to me as I read through it, because two of the use cases that they point out for when you should is when doing data structures and then when building libraries, depending on what the libraries are. But if you think about first, what does multi-instance means? It means that you're going to be creating multiple instances of these objects. And so if you don't plan to do that, if you don't need that, then it probably doesn't need to be wrapped in a class. And then non-serializable means that it's either hard or impossible to fully serialize and deserialize back in to the same object. So if that's the case, then it would probably be better to be wrapped in a class. And then when you have functionality that's all tightly coupled together, it makes sense to put them into a class. And this made sense to me because for Excalibur, the primary pattern that we tell people to do is to create classes for things. And if you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense for game development, because in JavaScript, and you can explain this better than I can, Eric, but when you create a class, you're creating an underlying prototype, and the engine behind the scenes is creating a memory location for that prototype, and it shares it across all instances. So it's a little bit more memory efficient than like creating new functions each time for like each instance of a game object.
Yeah. And the reason this is more efficient is because of the JIT behind, and how JavaScript is implemented is when you create a shape is kind of like the terminology that's used, or a hidden class. Whenever you're creating a shape in JavaScript, in order for it to be efficient, the interpreter or the JIT needs to know how that memory is laid out. And if it can reuse a layout, it can do it. It can share that between function invocations. So it actually is good to use like classes. And if you're not going to use classes, it's good to make a factory method, because then it's created the exact same way. And then JIT can know that it's the same shape.
Cool.
So not if you are like adamantly opposed to classes, it's important to create the same object the same way in the same order every time, because even this different order of properties can cause you to de-opt in your JIT and cause a performance problem in like a tight loop situation.
Do you cover that in your talk?
I do cover that in my talk that is not public yet, but as soon as it is, we'll talk about it, and I'll post the video.
Very nice. A couple of the use cases where he mentions like don't use classes that make sense to me are like input and output objects. So if you think about the response that comes back from an API that can be easily serializable, and you can serialize and stringify and destringify it pretty easily. You probably don't want to wrap those in classes because that makes it harder, where you'd have to create a new instance of a class to like get the data out. But what you could do is you could have like a static method that converts it into some kind of class if you need to. But like the actual objects that come back, probably don't want to wrap those in classes. And then anything that really needs to be instantiated once really doesn't need to be in a class. So if you think about what you would typically think of like a singleton type of pattern in like a object-oriented programming language, usually you would create a static class and then you would manage the instance so that there's only one that's available. You don't really need to do that much. There's a nuance there, but basically you don't really need to do that in JavaScript because modules are loaded once. Again, there's some nuance there, but mostly they're loaded once, so you can just export a function and you can be sure that it's the same instance. But there are actual cases where an instance of a function from the same module may not equal each other, but I don't really want to get into it.
Yeah. We have used that trick before, not the different function, but like we export from a module, we export a function that interacts with static data because in that module, it has private state inside that module, but you just export the function that interacts with that private state. So it's kind of one way to do it. Yep. And if you work in Angular, all Angular services are singletons by default. So and that's because they have their own dependency injection container that enforces that. And it's kind of the way that you want it in a client app. That might not be the way that you want it. In fact, it probably isn't the way you want it on a server-side backend, because then you have the problem of like request contamination from other requests. Which, I'm not going to name any names, but I have seen before in production.
That's why we use request scoped objects usually for
that is right.
That stuff. By the way, the nuance I'm talking about is when you have multiple entry points and they use the same shared module. Those instances are not always exactly the same, so you just got to watch out for that. Anyway, you have a advanced TypeScript talk that you saw on YouTube.
Yeah, and Web Dev Simplified, I've featured them before on the show. They put together a really great video that talks about some of the advanced TypeScript features like infer, extends, and ternaries to kind of a deep level in 25 minutes. It's great. Go watch it. I'll have a link to it in the show notes.
Excellent. Another recent TypeScript talk that was given was by Mike Hartington, who is on the NX team, which you may know as the TypeScript monorepo tool. He gave a talk on TypeScript performance. And so it's a bit different than Eric's talk, which is on JavaScript performance and like runtime performance. His talk is about how to make your builds faster in like a monorepo. And he mostly just talks about how to use project references correctly and cache the builds and type checking, and how to use NX to manage your monorepo because it has some nice ergonomics built on top of project references. And then related to that, Zod creator Colin Hacks wrote up an article, not this year, but I think last year, maybe a couple years ago, on a very similar topic, which was how to get monorepo projects to feel alive when you make changes. In other words, let's say you have 5 packages, you make a change in one package. In your editor, you want to see that reflected in your other package that you're working on that references the file that you just edited from the other package. And by default, TypeScript doesn't do that, or like the editors don't do that. So Colin goes through a few different approaches. One of them is to use project references, but he actually has a bit of a better solution, which is something called custom export conditions. And this is something that's supported in the TypeScript compiler, TSC, and it's compatible with Node, and so you don't need any extra tooling, and it just works, and it's kind of magical, actually, and it's really hard to explain, but it hints to the compiler and the editor to look at your types during editor time so that it just feels alive, so that it actually gets reflected in real time, so you don't have to do a build. But the advantage over project references is that it works for both development time and at production when you do a build. So you don't have to maintain separate configs for it. So anyway, I think you should definitely go check that out.
Awesome. I have another repo to take a look at that'll help you learn about signals. If you're not familiar with signals, it's a way of doing reactive state that it does like a pull instead of a push. So you pull for the state rather than push the state to everyone.
Yes.
Which turns out to be a little faster in front-end applications. And if you haven't looked at signals, It's pretty exciting stuff. They've kind of been the new hotness now in every front-end framework. You know what? Knockout called it. They were doing signals before signals were cool. But John Kuperman has put together a, educational signals implementation based on the TC39 proposal. John Kuperman, who is also on the TC committee, also a wonderful human being that I met a couple months ago in person to talk about accessibility. But definitely check out this repo in TypeScript to learn about signals.
Funny thing is that QuickCity also uses signals. So, and I hope to, once I get a little bit farther with the course, we can just do an episode, a deep dive on QuickCity, and I'll be able to talk about why it's kind of cool. Last, to close out the community section, we'd like to share some feedback that we got from an actual listener, a real person who listens to the show. This is from Andreas from Sweden. So I just pulled a few key things that they said in their email to us, things that they liked about the show. First, they get to hear about libraries that sound awesome. Yep, that's cool. That's one of our hopes that we can do. They get to learn about features of TypeScript that they didn't know about. Another one of our goals here. They enjoy the runtime news and comparisons. And I think this is where we can try to be helpful to the community of it's not, we do just report the news, but we also try to put it into context for your TypeScript developer. How does this compare to, something that you've used before, or what else is out there in the ecosystem? Because it can be really confusing. So that's one of our hopes is to make that more accessible. And then the last thing that they mention is that they really enjoy hearing from other TypeScript enthusiasts. So that's also our goal here, is to be a platform for the community. So that's why we link to everything that we talk about, and we want you to go follow these other people that are creating awesome TypeScript content. So yeah. So it was really nice to get that feedback.
Yeah,
we're doing something useful here.
Yeah, and if you have feedback, positive or negative, send that to feedback@typescript.fm.
Yep. Or you can comment in your podcast player of choice if it allows commenting. We do see those, and we try to respond to those. Or if it's directed at a guest, we try to get the guest to come in and respond to you too. Sweet. We've got some cool links to close out the show. Just something really quick. I saw someone reverse engineered Linear's sync engine. And if you're not familiar with Linear, it's sort of like an issue management system. It's sort of like a cool kids Jira, essentially. And the way that they have their engine set up, where it's offline first, so it's like local first architecture where you can make changes on your local machine and then they get synced up to the server. So in order to do that, you do need to architect your front end around that entire paradigm. So this person essentially reverse engineered their whole thing, documented it into a 1 hour read or something like that. But he posted a summary. So it only takes 10 minutes to read through the summary, and you can learn about the architecture. But the fun part is that the CTO of Linear was yeah, that's pretty good. It's actually better than our internal documentation.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. So it's endorsed by their CTO. So anyway, you can go check that out.
Awesome. My cool link for the week is from Paul Irish. He just posted that the Chrome Performance Panel has had a facelift and perf boost with a lot of cool new features. I won't enumerate them all, but after a person who just wrote a talk about JavaScript performance, I wish I had this a month or two ago. This would have been awesome.
Yes.
It's drastically improved the experience. So if you were oh yeah, the performance tools kind of are rough, they're a little less rough now.
Yeah, and I have my React performance course, and it's due for some maintenance because React 19 is out, and there's been some new React performance stuff to talk about, such as the React compiler. Kind of has a big impact on memoization and re-rendering. But this is also part of it because I do teach people how to use the Chrome performance tools to debug and analyze their apps. And a lot of this is really nice quality of life improvements to that experience. So this is pretty exciting.
I'm excited. And if you didn't know, also side plug for the Firefox performance tools, they analyze performance in kind of a different way than the Chrome one does. And it's also useful. So I actually when I'm doing performance stuff, I actually bounce between both Chrome and Firefox because their visualizations kind of highlight different things. Firefox definitely defaults to highlighting the hot path, which is oftentimes where you need to go first versus looking at a flame chart.
Very nice. All right. Well, I think that's a show.
All right.
Have a good one, everybody.
Yep, we'll see you later.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to typescript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at comronicus.com, and Eric is at ericonerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.